I hear so many times, I wish we could go back to the good old days. You know, somebody one time asked me, what is the definition of the good old days? And somebody, for lack of a better term, said it's when you were 9. No matter how old you are, it's when I was 9. That's the good old days. So kind of shows you how variable that definition is. But let's talk about the history of duck season, because the good old days, you know, you just alluded to how much good has been done with the North American Waterfowl Plan and what's been going on. And we are still continue to be on a 6 duck, 60-day season, which I don't know the exact years, we're 20 plus now?
23 years for 60 and 6. 2 years of 50 and 5 before that.
And how many times in history have we had a 6 duck, 60-day season?
Not very often.
And that's me. I think we're living them right now if you want to really look at it for as duck production, because we talked about you and your farm having to make drastic changes, is because if you pull the records, and I think you've done a little bit of that research, and I've got the paper here,
yeah.
We've had as little as 20 days and 2 ducks in the past. And so when you really look at where we've been, there have been some more stringent seasons and stringent limits than people realize, I think.
Well, when you think about if we look at the North American Waterfowl Management Plan's definition of the good old days, it was the 70s, because it was the 1970s that we set our population goals. And if we look back into the 1970s, here in Louisiana we had 55-day seasons. We had a point system, so depending on what you...
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I get asked that, where did the point system fall? Why was it here, and why did it go away? Was it experimental?
I know this is supposed to be a factual discussion, but when you start talking about the point system, you are going to get people's opinions drawn in. The reason the point system was developed is because we don't just go hunt white-tailed deer or eastern turkeys. We have 15 different species or more that we may be hunting here in Louisiana. And so we were looking for a system whereby we could make adjustments. You got to remember, in those days we thought harvest was a hell of a lot more important in driving waterfowl populations than we know it to be now. And so what system could we make adjustments, species-specific adjustments, within a fairly standardized harvest management system? A system that would also provide an impetus for hunters to improve their waterfowl identification skills. And so the point system was put into place largely for those reasons. And where the initial point values came from can be debated. I've heard all kinds of anecdotes related to that, but that was the system that was put into place. You could give a point value of 90 points and know that the maximum harvest for that species would be 2. For 100 it would be 1. And so if SCOP were doing well, we could drop the number of points on SCOP, we could increase the points on pintails. It was conceptually, it's an extremely flexible thing. In practice, it's a little more difficult, but really only difficult from a law enforcement standpoint, because order is important. when you got to 100 you had to quit. Well, you could reorder. As a biologist, I don't care. You can't reorder 2 100-point ducks. So you were there. So you look at a system that was in place for quite a while. It really had the role of transferring harvest pressure from high point birds to low point birds. Now, in the work that we did in the late 80s, and why the late 80s? Because in the late 80s, the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service eliminated the point system. There was a year, 1988, when Frank Dunkel, the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, said the point system is now gone. Law enforcement hated it. The point system's gone and shoot time is now sunrise instead of a half hour before sunrise. Us old people can remember those days. And then in 1989, the point system was back as an option, but it didn't allow any more ducks, even at the lowest point value, than the conventional bags, which in those days was 3 birds. But 5 states in the Central Flyway selected it. And so it created a situation, it created a statistical crossover design where a particular state had the point system, then had conventional bags, and then went back to the point system. And that's why the research showed that the point system did redirect harvest away from high point birds onto low point birds, but at the same time, looking at the banding data, that redirection didn't save enough birds to change the harvest rate or to change the survival rate of those species. And so for that reason, the point system faded away.
So you made the comment that U.S. Fish said we're not going to do that. So basically U.S. Fish dictates what the state seasons are, is that correct?
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is
work?
the trust agency for migratory birds. When we talk about the flyway councils and the state participation and the whole harvest management process, we are just advisory. The legal authority for the management of migratory birds lies with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And they can tell us to pound sand whenever they want to. And they do so pretty regularly. I was pushing for the inclusion of black-bellied whistling ducks into the teal season bag limit. And they said no. It doesn't matter what anybody else wants.
So ultimately the U.S. Fish tells the states what they can do.
Yes.
And so when you do you get to look at the framework, or do they give that to you? Don't you have scenarios of what you can do? Tell us about what the options they give you, because you don't have a whole lot of choices in what you can pick.
Back in 1990, back in the early 1990s, we were looking for a process that would eliminate the annual tinkering. They like to use it. Again, take yourself back to that time. Sometimes we still fight this, but we thought that harvest had a lot larger role in driving population dynamics than we know it does today. And so there was a lot of annual changes based on the information we got from the breeding survey that Dave told us about. And we were looking for a way to eliminate that. Also because people fight. We get into a room and we argue about how many ducks and how many days. And so when adaptive harvest management was put into place, one of the key components of AHM is that there are agreed upon harvest options. So when AHM first went live in 1995, our options were closed, 20 and 2, 30 and 3, 40 and 4, and 50 and 5. Those were the options that we had. And those were agreed upon by the flyway. It had gone through the process, and those are the only options. Now, right now as we talk, and for the last 20 years, our options have been 30 and 3, 45 and 6, or 60 and 6, or closed. Those are the only three options. They're agreed upon by everybody beforehand, and we have a process in place by which everyone agrees that we're going to act on those recommendations. And so when we talk, and you'll hear things every year from hunters, there are only three choices as we sit right now. Now, mallards drive the show. Okay, so everything I'm talking about relates to mallards. We have a different AHM harvest strategy for pintails. We have a different one for scaup. We have a different one for canvasbacks. We have a prescribed strategy for blue wings. If we have more than 3.7 million blue wings, we're going to have a 9-day season. If it gets above 4.5 million blue wings, we're going to have a 16-day season. That's a prescribed strategy. It doesn't have any inputs except for the BPOP estimate. For wood ducks, we're looking at the harvest rate. As long as the harvest rate for wood ducks remains, well, the kill rate, which is the harvest rate adjusted by crippling, as long as that kill rate stays below about 17%, we can maintain the bag limit of 3 wood ducks. But if that kill rate exceeds 17%, then we're going to consider reducing the bag limit back to 2 wood ducks. So we have all of these separate harvest strategies, but when we talk about AHM, the thing that tells us 60 and 6, 45 and 6, or 30 and 3, that's all mallards. And that's why when you see some of these documents, like I shared with you about the season dates, we can look back and we can see that in 1930 we had 92-day seasons, but by 1934 we had 30-day seasons. And we had 30-day seasons for 7 years, and then 45-day seasons, and then 60-day seasons. I mean, this string...
We've been all over the board.
Oh, yeah.
Which is all probably environmental factors that played into why we had to go to those different seasons.
Exactly right. And so this string of 23 years of 60-day seasons is unprecedented as far as duck seasons are concerned. One of the reasons is the development of this agreed upon beforehand harvest strategy that we call AHM, that has well-defined models, and those models are actually predicting next year's spring breeding population. So we can go back and see how well we did and weight our models appropriately. And by the way, all of this is going to change because we're going to an integrated population model that's just more statistical mumbo-jumbo for a mallard model that's just using up-to-date data. Because our current AHM, our 4 models that were developed in our current AHM, they don't use data past 2002. So they're pretty old, and as Mickey's going to talk about later, some things have happened since 2002 that have changed the differential vulnerability of mallards, in our harvest. And that needs to be incorporated. After next year, in the integrated population model, we will be using up-to-date. It will be updated every single year with current data, and thus it will include some of these new relationships that we're seeing in the information.
So as hunters, we hate to hear the word 30 days and 3 ducks. But we know as hunters that we have to manage a resource. And so we're okay with that if that's where we have to go.
And it's agreed upon beforehand, Doug. I know I've said that 4 times now. You're tired of hearing about it. But the thing is it's on the table. And so let's not get pissy when we have to go to 30 and 3 after 23 years of 60 and 6 because the process, the models, the data, they have all been available for everybody during this whole time. There are no surprises. There's nothing going on behind the smoke and mirrors at the bar room after we're done. It's all out there for everybody to see.
So, and we're with you on that. I mean, you've got to manage for the resource. There is no ifs, ands, or buts, and it hurts. It's a big pill to swallow, especially when you're in the business of duck hunting. I mean, it all affects our bottom dollar. But here's a question that I get asked is, why do we have to follow the format? And I understand the process, but is it time that we think outside the box of how we set seasons? And I've got to give credit to Kyle Broussard with Gator Tail, because this is an idea that he presented to me a year ago, is when we go to a 30-day duck season, we actually, no doubt, we cut a lot of time off and a lot of opportunities. And probably the people, in my opinion, that suffer the most are the weekend hunters, because they don't have as many weekends to get off to go do duck hunts. So he come up with a proposal, and I'm just throwing this out as a scenario just to get y'all's opinions, is if you were to take a 30-day duck season and do similar like we're doing with sniper season and only hunt Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and you look at those 3 days, you span that over 10 weeks, it almost fits in the time frame of a 60-day duck season. And so the people that hunt weekends keep the interest up, keep the license sales up, and that kind of stuff. And we know you don't have that option. I'm not trying to pin that on you.
No, you can't.
But how would that affect hunting? Your ducks would rest during the week. Everybody get to hunt on the weekends. It would keep interest in hunting, might be best for the industry of hunting, but how would somebody, is that even possible to change?
It is absolutely possible to change. In fact, we are seeing changes to hunting regulations this upcoming season because of legislation introduced by the senator from Mississippi. We're seeing changes. So everything can be changed. The other thing is that this can go through the normal flyway process. It can be introduced at the flyway. It can be approved, recommended, and move up to the Fish and Wildlife Service. We can change this whole thing. What I want hunters to think about is, why is there an option for 30 and 3? There's an option for 30 and 3 because the population is in trouble. The population has declined to a point where we are trying to reduce the harvest rate on waterfowl. That is our goal. Now, if we, and we have limits, just like what you're talking about, we're going to hunt Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for 10 weekends. We have 10 weekends in the season right now. So it would fit perfectly. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for 3 weekends. Well, what we'd have is we'd have resting. We would have an opening day effect. We would have people concentrating their efforts on those days. And so we won't get the decrease in harvest rate that our management is intending to get us. And so we have to keep in mind that balance between what we're trying to provide for hunters and what we're trying to accomplish in our harvest management for the maintenance of duck populations. Now, I am working in that direction. I'm actually proposing a change in zones and splits options this year. I don't know if it will be approved, but I want to keep at least 2 zones in the state of Louisiana, but allow 2 splits during the season so that I'd have more flexibility in setting the season. In doing that, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm trying to generate rest periods, focus my hunting activity at times when hunters can be more successful, and consequently, we'll probably see an increase in the harvest. And I think Mickey's going to talk a little bit about that later. 1975, Louisiana was the first state that was allowed to have zones. Not only that, but our west zone in 1975 got 5 extra days because we were trying to trick the Fish and Wildlife Service into letting us into the Central Flyway. Now, of course, the Central Flyway told us to pound sand because if they took all of our hunters and harvest, they'd be the ones with 60-day seasons, and the Mississippi Flyway would have 74-day seasons. Would have been good for Arkansas. Too bad. But so now you have zones, and then you have splits. And now then you have 60 days that you can zone and split. So just imagine this bird that starts getting shot at in September 1st in Canada coming all the way down with all of these states. I'm the state of Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, I'm on the border of this great big Great Lake where it doesn't freeze. where I could shoot scaup and mallards and late migrating species. So I want splits and I want zones. And the end result is, I mean, why are we doing it, right? We make up stories about we're doing it so that we can provide opportunity for our hunters at the right time. You know, we have birds migrating early, we have birds migrating late, but let's be honest. We're doing it because we think it's going to allow us to kill more ducks. And so there's this constant negotiation between the flyway, within the flyway, and between the flyway and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to balance the hunting opportunity we provide to our hunters while maintaining the protections of harvest management for maintaining the populations of ducks.